The world knew them as the perfect on-screen duo. Wang Yibo, the cool, reserved talent with an almost untouchable aura, and Xiao Zhan, the warm, radiant soul who could light up an entire set with a single smile. They first met in the bustling chaos of a drama production, where cables coiled on the floor like sleeping snakes and the air was thick with the scent of makeup powder and brewing coffee. Their roles demanded chemistry, but no one could have predicted that real chemistry, the kind that doesn't fade when the cameras stop rolling, would ignite between them. Wang Yibo was a man of few words. His mind always calculating, observing, almost like a chess player studying every possible move. Xiao Zhan was different. Spontaneous, emotional, with laughter that could pierce through even the heaviest silence. Their first true connection didn't happen during a scripted scene. It happened late one night, long after the crew had left, under the dim yellow glow of a half-broken streetlight outside the set. Xiao Zhan, shivering slightly in the cold, handed Yibo a cup of hot milk tea without saying a word. Yibo accepted it, and for a brief moment, their fingers brushed. A silent exchange that spoke louder than any dialogue they'd rehearsed. From that night onward, something shifted. They began to gravitate towards each other. In crowded rooms, in lunch breaks, in quiet corners where no one was watching. Or at least they thought no one was. In the entertainment world, love is both a blessing and a curse. Rumors are like sparks. They spread quickly and can burn everything to the ground. For two male stars with millions of fans, the stakes were even higher. They learned to hide their affection behind small, almost invisible gestures. A quick glance during an interview, the way Yibo would unconsciously hand Xiao Zhan a bottle of water first before taking one himself, the way Xiao Zhan's laughter seemed brighter when Yibo was near. But the industry wasn't kind to people who dared to break its unspoken rules. The gossip columns began to whisper, fans started to speculate, and the pressure mounted. Yibo, ever the protector, suggested they put distance between themselves for a while. Just until the noise dies down, he said one evening, his voice low and heavy. Xiao Zhan forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed him. The thought of stepping back from the one person who truly understood him felt like cutting off a piece of his soul. They drifted but never fully let go. Like two stars caught in each other's orbit, no matter how far apart they moved, the pull was always there. It was during a charity project months later that fate decided to intervene. Both had been invited to perform at a benefit concert for children's education. Backstage was a whirlwind of sound checks and costume fittings, but when Yibo saw Xiao Zhan again, it was as if the months of distance vanished in a heartbeat. Xiao Zhan greeted him with that same disarming smile, and for the first time in a long while, Yibo let his guard down. During the performance, they shared the stage for a duet, their voices blending seamlessly, their gazes locking in ways the audience could feel even from the farthest row. By the time the curtain fell, it was clear to them both. They had spent enough time hiding in the shadows. One rainy night, in a small cafe tucked away from the neon chaos of the city, they made their choice. "We've been living like shadows of ourselves," Xiao Zhan said, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I don't care about the noise anymore, Yibo. I care about you." Yibo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached across the table, taking Xiao Zhan's hand in his own. The rain tapped softly against the windows, like a quiet applause for a decision long overdue. "Then let's stop hiding," Yibo finally said. And with that, the weight they'd been carrying for years seemed to lift. The announcement came subtly at first, a candid photo of them walking side by side, hands intertwined, posted on Xiao Zhan's social media with no caption. The internet exploded, but instead of backlash, an overwhelming wave of support flooded in. Fans wrote letters, drew fan art, and even organized events celebrating their courage. Brands that had once been hesitant now clamored to have them together in campaigns, calling them the embodiment of trust and love. Their relationship flourished in the open. They were seen at small bookstores, riding motorcycles through countryside roads, and sometimes just enjoying ice cream in the park. For once, the cameras didn't feel intrusive. They felt like witnesses to something real and rare. It happened far from the spotlight, in a quiet mountain village they'd visited during a filming break. The air was crisp, the sky painted with stars so bright they looked almost unreal. Yibo had always been the quiet one, but that night he spoke more than usual. They sat on a wooden bench outside their little guest house, the smell of pine in the air. "You've been my light," Yibo said softly, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Through every shadow, every storm. I don't want to just walk beside you in public. I want to walk beside you for the rest of my life." Xiao Zhan's eyes glistened. His answer was immediate, not in words but in the way he leaned forward and kissed him, sealing the promise. Their wedding wasn't the grand spectacle the tabloids expected. Instead, it was intimate, attended only by close friends, family, and a few trusted colleagues. They chose a serene lakeside location, where willow branches swayed in the wind and lanterns floated gently on the water. Xiao Zhan wore a classic white suit, while Yibo opted for a sleek black one, their styles different yet perfectly complementing each other. The ceremony was filled with quiet moments that spoke volumes. The way Yibo's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted Xiao Zhan's boutonniere, the way Xiao Zhan wiped away a tear as he said his vows. "From the shadows we found our light," Xiao Zhan said, his voice breaking just enough to make the moment real. "And I promise we will never lose it again." Their story became a beacon for many, not just fans but anyone who had ever been afraid to love openly. They showed that even in an industry built on image and control, genuine connection could survive, even thrive. They continued their careers, often working together but also supporting each other's solo projects. At home, they built a life filled with simple joys, cooking meals together, rescuing stray cats, tending to a small garden on their balcony. Whenever asked about the secret to their relationship, Yibo would smile and say, "Patience." Xiao Zhan would add, "And the courage to step into the light." Years later, as they sat on the same mountain bench where Yibo had proposed, the air once again filled with pine and the distant hum of crickets, they reflected on their journey. From the first brush of fingers over milk tea to the vows exchanged under lantern-lit skies, they had weathered storms that could have easily torn them apart. But instead, those storms had only deepened their bond. In the end, they weren't just two stars who found each other in the chaos of fame. They were two souls who proved that love, when true, is the brightest light of all. The first time Wang Yibo saw Xiao Zhan in person, it was like a scene out of a dream he didn't know he'd been having. The set was alive with movement, makeup artists darting in and out, crew members hauling equipment, a director shouting instructions over the noise. And then there was Xiao Zhan, leaning casually against a prop table, laughing at something a stylist said. His smile was disarming, not the kind that's rehearsed for cameras, but warm and entirely his own. Yibo wasn't the kind to be easily distracted, but something about Xiao Zhan's presence pulled him in. Not just his looks, though he was undeniably striking, but the way he seemed to radiate an energy that made everyone around him feel lighter. It wasn't until 3 days later that they had their first real conversation. A late-night rehearsal had gone on longer than expected, and by the time they wrapped, most of the crew had already left. Xiao Zhan was sitting alone on a wooden bench outside the studio, scrolling through his phone. "You're still here?" Yibo asked, his voice quiet but laced with curiosity. Xiao Zhan looked up, slightly startled, then smiled. "Could say the same about you. Thought you'd be the first to leave." Yibo shrugged, holding up the helmet in his hand. "Was just checking my bike. Engine's been acting up." Xiao Zhan tilted his head, playful. "So, the mysterious Wang Yibo rides a motorcycle. Figures." The wind was sharp that night, and without a word, Xiao Zhan handed him a steaming cup of milk tea from the small convenience store across the street. Their fingers brushed, just for a second, but it was enough to send a strange warmth through Yibo that had nothing to do with the drink. From then on, their interactions were subtle but frequent. Yibo, who was known for keeping to himself, began lingering near Xiao Zhan between scenes. Xiao Zhan, who could easily talk to anyone, found himself saving certain stories, certain jokes, just for Yibo. On one particular afternoon, during a break, they found themselves sitting on the studio rooftop. Below them, The city was a patchwork of flashing billboards and narrow streets. Ever feel like all of this? Xiao Zhan gestured toward the busy cityscape. Is just noise. Yibo glanced at him, catching the faint vulnerability in his expression. Sometimes. But noise isn't always bad. Sometimes it hides you. Gives you space to breathe. Xiao Zhan smiled faintly. And sometimes it keeps you from hearing what you really want. They didn't talk much after that, but the air between them felt charged, the kind of quiet that says more than words. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. On set there were whispers. An extra long glance here, a shared laugh there. People saw more than they should have. The entertainment industry had a way of taking a harmless moment and spinning it into something scandalous. One night, after a particularly long shoot, their manager pulled Yibo aside. You need to be careful, he warned. People are talking. And you know how dangerous that can be. That night, Yibo sat in his apartment, staring at the half-drunk cup of milk tea Xiao Zhan had given him earlier. He thought about how easy it would be to step back, to put distance between them before things got messy. But the thought left a hollow ache in his chest. Weeks later, on a rainy day, their paths crossed again outside of work. Xiao Zhan was standing at a bus stop, drenched, holding a flimsy paper bag that was starting to tear from the water. Without thinking, Yibo pulled over, rain streaking his helmet visor. Get in, he said simply. Xiao Zhan hesitated for half a second before sliding onto the back of the bike. As they rode through the wet streets, Xiao Zhan's arms wrapped lightly around Yibo's waist. The sound of the rain mixed with the steady hum of the engine, and for that brief ride, the rest of the world didn't exist. When they stopped in front of Xiao Zhan's apartment, he removed his helmet, hair damp and messy. You didn't have to, he said softly. I know, Yibo replied. But I wanted to. One late evening, they found themselves alone in a rehearsal room after everyone else had left. Xiao Zhan was running through his lines, his voice echoing slightly against the mirrored walls. Yibo sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, just watching. Why are you looking at me like that? Xiao Zhan asked, amused. Just seeing you, Yibo answered, his voice low. Like really seeing you. For a moment, Xiao Zhan didn't know how to respond. He simply walked over, sitting beside Yibo, their shoulders brushing. They didn't move away. The pressure from outside finally reached a boiling point. A gossip site released a blurry photo of them walking together after a late shoot, and within hours it was trending. Yibo was the first to suggest space. Maybe we should lay low for a while, he said reluctantly. Xiao Zhan didn't argue. If that's what you think is best. But his voice carried a heaviness Yibo couldn't ignore. The weeks that followed were quiet, and not the good kind. They still saw each other on set, but the easy conversations were gone, replaced with polite nods and forced distance. It was a different kind of pain, the kind that doesn't leave a mark but carves deep inside. But love, when real, doesn't vanish because of distance. Small moments kept breaking the wall. Yibo leaving an extra bottle of water in Xiao Zhan's dressing room by accident, Xiao Zhan saving him a seat at lunch even when they weren't speaking much. One night, after another charity rehearsal where they'd been paired together for a song, Yibo walked him to the parking lot. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine. You've been okay? Yibo asked, almost awkwardly. Xiao Zhan looked at him for a long moment before answering. I've been waiting. It wasn't a confession, not exactly. But Yibo understood. And from that moment, he knew the distance was temporary. Because no matter how deep the shadows, they would always find their way back to the light.